Good afternoon, everybody. Hope your day is going well. If you can, please share the link. We're going to get started shortly here. Once again, hopefully you're doing well this afternoon. If you don't mind, please share the link. We can start about 30 seconds. Appreciate it. Appreciate you guys' patience. We're going to start in about 15 seconds. Appreciate you, brothers and sisters' patience. All right. We'll open with prayer, and then we're getting into tonight's discussion. Heavenly Father, Yahweh, just thank you for your mercy, for allowing us to see today, sustaining our natural bodies and for those that are in Christ, our spiritual lives as well. It was that you continue to conform us more and more to your image, grow us more and more in your characteristics, cause us to not only love those who love us, but also love those who hate us, so that we may be truly children of yours as we live on this earth and being those true lights that we're called to be. Lord, as we set aside this time to go over these things today, pray that you open up the hearts, minds, and ears of the brothers and sisters listening, that they will be able to understand, perceive, and understand and do what it is that you require of us as we wait on the day of Christ. Pray that the things said today will enlighten someone's mind and draw them out of the heresy and false ideology that is perpetuated, especially out the world, especially online, regarding this matter that will be discussed today regarding Deuteronomy. And so, Lord, just thank you for all these things in your son, Yeshua of Nazareth's name. Amen. All right. Let's get this off my screen here. Hopefully y'all doing well, man. If it's your first time joining, I'm Pastor Jay. And we are back again today. Talk about another matter, man. Sometimes I try to figure out how to fit these kind of classes in the loop. And slowly trying to figure that out. Like at some point during the month, or at least there'll be some like set aside special class that's regarding this matter. I don't want to forget those who are affected by the code I once was a part of. And so I definitely want to continue to deal with matters in there, but the way, I guess you'll say, the way that or the goal, obviously the goal is that people would come from under the cloud of deception, from under this movement, but the main goal is this. All right, so I'm a pastor. My job is to instruct the brothers and sisters in the words of the Lord. We have the Old Testament writings, we have the New Testament writings, we have the Psalms, the Proverbs, and all these things. And even if you don't have to do like a letter of the law, like Feast Day of Atonement or something like that, like we don't not read it because we don't have to do that feast. according to the way that Moses was commanded to tell the children of Israel. We still read it because there's a great wisdom to be gained from those things, even though we don't. It's just like when we look at the laws of sacrifice. All right, whether you're in a certain sects than the Black Hebrew Israelites or in any Christian church, we'll all unanimously agree that we ain't got to sacrifice because Jesus Christ did it all and fulfilled it once and for all, right? So we all agree with that, but we don't not read the passages that talk about the animal sacrifices for his great wisdom, and these things were used as a teaching lesson. So we read these things, not trying to redo them, but we're reading them to learn the lesson as to why God had even instituted it in the first place. What is it that we had to learn? Because it wasn't really about those animals. And so we read it for that same purpose. The same thing we talk about things like Deuteronomy or the Exodus or or the garden, right? And so it's for the same purpose. So in order to deal with those books, especially when you talk about Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, I'm gonna just stop it right there. Of course, when you get into Joshua and the conquest and all these different things, but specifically when we talk about Exodus coming out of Egypt, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, it's almost nearly impossible to deal with it without certain questions coming up. And because of the climate within the realm of the people I've moved around and about, and in the cult that I was in years ago, and what it is that they push, and some other things that I know goes on online. There's questions that always come up, and there's a phrase that's always said. You guys would have seen it in the thumbnail. Excuse me. Who else been through these curses? Now, the people who are hell-bent about curses, all right, is namely because they're trying to determine who the children of Israel are, naturally speaking, who are the fleshly descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so that's the reason why they're, harping about this. They feel like it's very, very important to know who they are in order to understand prophecies and, to understand the New Testament. You got to know who the Israelites is according to the flesh. You need to identify all the tribes, which is false, by the way. But, but in order for a person to understand the New Testament, they need to know who is each tribe. And so, and when it comes to the kingdom of God, depending on which part you talk to, there's some of them that say, yeah, we're the Israelites, but Gentiles can be saved as well. Then you got the other ones like, no, salvation is only for the Israelites. And, y'all have heard it. Most of y'all have heard it. That listens here. Most of y'all have heard these reasonings and arguments. And so when people are going through Deuteronomy, they're talking about the curses and they're asking this question, who else been through it? It's because they believe that the Deuteronomy 28 is the Lord telling the children of Israel, like, look, these things are going to happen to y'all and only y'all. And this is how y'all going to be able to know y'all the Israelites in the future. When y'all forget who y'all is, y'all can go basically find yourselves by going to Deuteronomy and, piece together this little puzzle of curses and then look through history. And then, it's only going to be these things that you read in Deuteronomy is only going to happen to one particular group of people. And that's God's signal that y'all the Israelites. Like, that's how they're treating that. All right. Not everybody who claim they're Israelite go by that, but the mass majority do. All right. And so, when we talk about like camps and things like that, we talk about IUIC, GMS, ISUPK, and all them. Majority of these guys, even those that claim they ain't part of the camps, still walk around with them charts. And the chart has been revised over the years. Like, there's been some stuff added since I've been in there. So, but the point is that's why they harping on that. My purpose for going over Deuteronomy 28 and what they won't tell you about this is the usage of Deuteronomy 28 and why they use it the way that they do was not the Lord's intent. It wasn't Moses' intent when he told the people this. And to use that and to then ask who else been through these curses to normal people in the middle of the streets that are slung on drugs and in a club somewhere, probably didn't graduate high school, probably if they did, it probably was like a low GPA and getting into college. And even if they're in college, they ain't learning world history like that. So, and most people just sit around and the movies that they watch all the time, especially when it comes to slavery, is like 12 Years a Slave and what's the other joints? You got 12 Years a Slave. You got that other one. I forgot what it's called. I know it's some other thing that was just recently done. But it's like always about the transatlantic slave trade. They barely know about anything else. All right. They barely know the ins and outs of the transatlantic slave trade, let alone some other people, right? So if you barely know about what happened in the transatlantic slave trade and you supposed to be a descendant of some slaves in America, your chances of knowing about other stuff is like slim to none. Because if you go on Google and just type in, slave trade, the first 1,000, 2,000 pages of Google is going to all be about transatlantic slave trade. All right. Not other people. You got to like going into a deeper depth little hole to get to other stuff. That matters. All right. It matters. Transatlantic slave trade matter. And the other big giant slave trade that was going on during that same time matters, especially in light of who else been through these curses. But the point of this is this. You guys have heard when I spoke about this a while back that all people groups on the face of the planet that's ever existed been through every last one of those blessings and curses that y'all read in Deuteronomy 28. The purpose of Deuteronomy 28 was not to say, hey, guys, look, these things will only happen to one people group. And so through these things, you'll be able to identify who God people is. All right. That was not the purpose of it. We will go with what the purpose was. But I want to show you guys also something, because like in that question that's always asked, and it stumps black people. It's meant to stump black people. It's like Satan's little special question that he asks, through people to stump blacks and Hispanics, mainly blacks, Hispanics, Native Americans, is who else been through these curses that you guys see on the screen in a moment. Boom. All right. Who else been through these curses? Starting at verse 15 through 68. Now, there's something important to mention. I know there's some arguments from people out there. They're not really good arguments, and I would have to actually agree with Black Hebrew Israelites when the response is this. I actually agree with their response regarding this. Some people, when they're talking about these curses and they're arguing against Black Hebrew Israelites, claim that they're the Israelites based on, Deuteronomy 28, 68, and these other curses. And so they ask who else been through it. The people then start, I've heard apologists asking them like, oh, in the transatlantic slave trade, who came over? What king came over with y'all on the slave ship? So they're trying to disqualify the Black Hebrew Israelites claim about being the Israelites, because they're trying to see, let me get this verse right quick. All right. You and your king. Hold on. Let me get it. In verse, actually, it's up. My bad, guys. In verse, give me a second, guys. Here we go. In verse 36, when it says, the Lord will exile you and your king to a nation unknown to you and your ancestors. So I've heard people argue like, and they ask them, who was your king that came? What king came over on any of them ships? And then, Black Hebrew Israelite argue and say that all these curses didn't have to come upon you at one time. This happened at different times, right? So I actually agree with that. When it comes to these curses that y'all read, that we're going to look at, they don't all, thank the Lord he don't, but they don't all come upon a people at one time. Like, you be utterly annihilated if God brought all these curses on you at one time. So thank the Lord, the way that the curses happen is that in one time when the Lord turns against the people, he just has them oppressed. But that time he might have them oppressed, but they get to remain in their land. All right. Like during the time of Babylon, someone's taken to Babylon, but then Babylonian or Nebuchadnezzar ruled over all their lands. And the agreement was basically, if you submitted yourself to Nebuchadnezzar, though you be in captivity with yokes of iron around your neck, you at least be able to stay in your land. that was the agreement. But if you decide to fight against something, you'd be utterly destroyed by God's sword. Other times, the Lord would then carry some of the Israelites off from the land, and a remnant remains in the land. Sometimes he carried them all the way off the land, meaning all of them, and none of them are in the land. Sometimes they've been replaced by other people. Sometimes the land just stayed desolate. Sometimes the temple was destroyed. Sometimes the temple stood. Sometimes the Ark of the Covenant, though this temple's still there, the Ark of the Covenant was taken. And the people remained in the land, but then the Philistines would come and oppress them while they're in the land. So you had these different kind of situations. You got pestilence would come, but the pestilence came while they were still in the land. The drought, the famine came, but it was still in the land. Sometimes the famine came and caused the people to have to exile the land in order to survive. I mean, to flee from the land in order to survive. That's what happened eventually. That led to Ruth and everything when she came back. All right, when Ruth came to the children of Israel land after Naomi, the Jewish woman, fled with her family because of the famine that was so bad in the land. All right, and so they met Ruth while they were in the land of Moab. All right, and so, but the point is, when they come back, sometimes the Lord sent slave captors and snatched them kids right out of the Israelites' hands. Sometimes he sent them and they just die with a sword. Other times the Lord, as we read in here, the cattle, pestilence of disease, but it was still in the land, like the time of David. Pestilence of disease was in the land. That was a curse because it sins. But it was still in the land, and David was still the king at the time. And then, eventually after years of people dropping dead, then the Lord sent David to buy that threshing floor and then sacrifice to him, and then the Lord stopped the plague. All right. So we have these examples where, a plague would come, or multitudes of plagues would come, or disasters would come upon the children of Israel, but not all of them at one time. So the fact that even if nobody could find one king that came along with anybody on the slave ship, that really doesn't matter, and it's not a really good argument to try to say somebody's not the Israelites because they can't find a king that came over on the slave ships in the transatlantic slave trade. So I actually agree with that response, all right, because that's not how the curses worked, all right? And that's not how they work, because the curses are still here on the earth today. They're still here. You can open up your eyes, you can go on Google, go on the internet. They're here, alive in effect, all right? As well as the blessings. They're still here too, all right? So if that's the case, all right, if you can't use this to determine who the Israelites is, because Pastor Jay, you're saying that everybody that ever existed, all the nations on the planet, in all their histories, they share these same blessings, they share these same curses. My answer would be yes. Pastor Jay, have you looked at all nations? Have you read all history that's ever been written to know this for sure? My answer to you is that you don't have to read every book that's ever written and know the names of all nations and tribes that's ever existed to know for sure that they've all been through these blessings and all been through these curses. How can you say that? That's foolish then. It ain't. How is that? Remember the words of Christ, and then we'll show you some examples in the scriptures. All right. And you can just, modern day, they're still here. All right. For example, and then I want to show you guys a few links, a few things. So let's look at the blessings first. Most people are concerned about the curses. But the blessings are just equally as important as well. So the Lord told, first of all, let me start here, because normally, and then let me make sure I'm in the King James Version. Let's go to Deuteronomy chapter 1, just to establish something. Because if you guys ever hear, people like IUSC and them teachings, they love to run to this verse to make a point. I'm going to make the same point when they read this verse, all right? And then I'm going to jump back to Deuteronomy 28. And that is verse, the words which Moses spake unto all Israel. The argument be, who did Moses speak to? Who is this Bible written to? Moses talking to the children of Israel here in Deuteronomy chapter 1 doesn't mean that the book of Deuteronomy was written only for the Israelites. That's not what that means. All right. But indeed, in Deuteronomy chapter 1, verse 1, it says, these be the words which Moses spake to all spoken to all Israel on that side of the Jordan in the wilderness. So their argument be like, all right, so then what we about to read is only to the Israelites. Fine. I'll agree with you. I agree with you that Moses is talking to the children of Israel. They're sitting there in the wilderness. He's the messenger of God, the mediator. He's sitting down and teaching these folks something. All right. I agree with that. He's talking to them. All right. Now let's go to Deuteronomy 28 because he's still talking to them. He's still talking to them. Even though we also, as you know, we can make the argument that, hey, man, there was a mixed multitude there. And so there was some Gentiles stirred, mixed up in there, during this time as it really was. But nevertheless, even though they were there, the only nation, like a total people group, nation-wise, was the Israelites. The other people were like remnant, scattered people from different tribes of the world that had fled out of Egypt when the children of Israel left. Like, so though they were there, let's just ignore that they're there right now. Let's just deal with the only like full nation that's present right now, which is the Israelites. So in Deuteronomy 28, Moses is talking to them, all right? And he tells them, and it shall come to pass, if thou, Israel, shalt hearken diligently to the voice of the Lord our God, to observe and to do all his commandments, which he commanded them that day, meaning the first testament that he gave through Moses, from the animal sacrifices to the purifications to the Levites and their duties to everything, the temple service, all that he commanded them. If they do all of that, like the Lord commanded them that day, the Lord will set them on high above all the nations of the earth. Now, how would he do that? All right. The Israelite race, as much as they would like to think, those that make the claim, they're not a naturally special race that God made on the world. Like we're made in the world. They don't got special hair. Their hair is the most special or something. Their skin is the most special color. That ain't it. Here's how we know from the very words of Moses that it was nothing special about them. So I know a lot of times, especially from the group that I came from, there's this immense pride, all right? And not even just them, even in Judaism, the same way. Even Christ dealt with it, same thing. Those who say they're Jews, according to the flesh, all right? From the ones that ain't got no birth certificates, but they say they are, because, I mean, when I say birth certificates, I mean, they got birth certificates, naturally speaking, but I mean, like, registries that proves, naturally speaking, their descendants. Those that have it in the world, that says, I'm Jew because my mother and my father, and this is my, lineage little card I got. And the ones that ain't got nothing like that, but makes the claim because of curses or those who prick their blood, and it said they're 35% whatever. And so they're like, oh, okay. And then, so they make the claim. Or the ones who don't got no registries, but it's got oral traditions that tells them that they're Jews. So whichever little, group you come from, there's this natural pride that comes in a lot of them because of this, we're Jews, all right? Just like we read in the scriptures. Abraham's our father. This immense pride that comes from their lineage knowledge, all right? And so, but we know, and though they feel they're special, and I know people like IOC, and I'm going to keep referencing them because that's where I was, all right? And I know what they teach, and I know many people follow that teaching, but I'm just going to refer their name the most, all right? And so, but we know there's nothing inherently special about anybody who is a Jew according by flesh. They're no better than anybody else. The reason we know that is because Moses said to them, if you obey the words of this covenant and do all the commandments that the Lord your God commanded this day, then the Lord will set thee on high above the nations. That means naturally they're not set above the nations. That's what that means. They're no different than anybody else. But by being called of God, and if they walk in obedience, then the Lord will set them high above the nations. All right? So they weren't just, you're Jews, so you're better than everybody else. No, it's you Jews, you're the same as everybody else. But if you obey God, he'll then set you up high above everybody. All right? That's what Moses told them. But not only that, he said, I will set thee above all the nations of the earth. And when the Lord set them up high, the Lord's going to show you what it means to be set up above, above these nations. When he sets you above the nations, he says, and all these blessings shall come on thee and overtake thee if thou hearken unto the voice of the Lord thy God. So the Lord said, if you obey me and keep all my words, hold on, let me turn this fan on. If you obey me and obey all these words, Then I'll set you above all the nations of the earth, and all these blessings will come down on you. So the blessings coming down and overtaking them would have been the sign that they were set up high above the nations. All right. That would have been the sign. So when they were set up on high, when they were blessed above the nations, and these blessings come and be the sign of that they've been set up there. What were their blessings? The blessings was, thou shalt be blessed in the city and blessed in the field. So their marketplaces in the city will be full of grain and food and flour and, fruits. And in the field, where the pasture lands and the harvest season and the cattle and the kinds, and they be blessed. So they have abundance of animals, which would mean they have a lot of meat, a lot of food, a lot of clothing, because they would shear off the wool and they would use that to make the clothing and make the blankets and make all these different things. So they'd be blessed in the field. Harvest time come, they would have their vines and their grapes and all these things in abundance. Meaning there would be no famine or drought or nothing like that. Now, while another nation is in famine and drought and in need and fleeing to the lands, trying to borrow stuff, the Israelites being set on high, the sign was they wouldn't have to borrow anything from anybody, because they would have had all the resources they had needed in the land to survive for their people. So they would have the city be blessed and the field. But then he says, also be blessed shall be the fruit of thy body, meaning another sign that they were set on high by everybody else was the reproduction of humans. God blessing the womb. So many kids, many descendants was another sign that had been blessed by God. No barren woman in the land. They would have all been given birth, and their nation would continue to grow. And obviously, as more people populate, you need more space. And therefore, your borders will extend. And the way that the Lord extends borders is through war and conquest. Okay? That's how he extends borders. And that's how he takes away borders. All right. So that they have many descendants. The fruit of the ground be blessed. The fruit of the cattle will continue to have babies and stuff. So they'll continually have animals for sacrifice and for eating. The increase of thy kind and the flocks of the sheep. Then the Lord said, blessed will be thy basket and thy store. So beyond the city itself being blessed, obviously with the homes and different things and the material stuff that's there and the people and the mass production of kids and, and health, because there'd be no pestilence of disease plague, and many descendants and the field and the harvest time and the crops, and they don't have to borrow from nobody because everything's taken care of by the Lord because they obey him. Said, blessed be thy basket and thy store. They said, blessed thou should be when thou comest in and when thou goest out, meaning coming into the city and going out of the city, because not all of Israel lived in the city. They lived in the surrounding lands that God had given them as a inheritance. But wherever they went at, they will be blessed, coming in and going out. Then it says, then the Lord shall cause thine enemies, because while they're set on high, being blessed, not having to borrow anything from anybody, they're just a self-sufficient nation. While they're a self-sufficient nation, not because of their own doings, but because God taking care of them, they'll have nations that envy them, that hate them. All right? And so that will want to destroy them. And the Lord said he will cause the enemies that hate them, that rise up against them. So while they're obeying the Lord, their enemies will rise up against them to try to destroy them. All right? So obeying the Lord for the Israelites didn't mean you would never suffer. It just means that when you suffered, God would protect you. That's what it means. So whether you obeyed or disobeyed, you would suffer anyway. All right? You will suffer oppression anyway. But when you suffer, if you're obeying, the Lord will protect you and you'll be able to endure. And as this blessing said, the Lord shall cause thine enemies that rise up against thee to be smitten before thy face. They'll rise up. They'll threaten to utterly destroy you. They'll oppress you a little bit, and then the Lord will rise up somebody and slay these jokers. He said they'll come in one way and they'll flee 7 different ways. That's how bad the beating would be. All right. The Lord shall command a blessing upon thee in thy storehouses, where they, a little treasury for food. All right. And then they had a little, gold and stuff that people would donate for the temple and all that. And all that thou settest thine hand unto. And it said, he shall bless thee in the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee. So these are examples of the blessings. Those blessings were signs that they were set up high, where they don't have to borrow. They'll be self-sufficient. They got kids galore. They got crops galore. Their cities blessed. Their fields blessed. Ain't no pestilence. Ain't no famine. Ain't none of this curses. All right. So those are blessings. So when the Lord says, and remember, all these blessings, just as with the curses, all these blessings don't come upon you all at once. Don't come all at once. All right. So, yet they come. Now, with these blessings, there's a natural element that's very much required and very important that the Lord uses to bring about these blessings. All right. Outside of like the increase of thy kind or cattle, I won't even say it's apart from that element. All right. Water is very important. Rain. Rain is important in order for the city and the field, store, and basket to be blessed. You need the rain so that you have the season of harvest where you have the actual crops. Nothing grows without rain. You need rain because the rain causes the crop to grow that feeds both men and animals so that they will naturally live. If you have no rain, you have no harvest. You have no harvest, you have no food. You have no food, men get smaller and smaller as they don't eat. Animals get skinnier and skinnier as they don't eat. Well, eventually that leads to drought and famine and pestilence of disease and people dropping dead out of starvation. All right, which would be curse. So water or rain is very important. So this means that when the Lord blesses the children of Israel, causes the rains to come in their season, that then produces harvest in their fields, so they would then have the abundance of food to then bring into the storehouses, to then bring into the stores, the marketplaces, and in their baskets out in the fields. In order for that to be blessed, rain must fall from heaven. And Christ said these words in the New Testament when he said, not only love those who love you, meaning your neighbor, but also love your enemies, then you be acting as true children of God in heaven. For he causes the rain, which produces all the things I just finished saying. He causes it to fall on the good and the evil alike, meaning the ones who obey him, the ones who disobey him. He brings the rain down on both groups. So as the Lord opens up the windows of heaven and rain down blessings on the Israelites who obeyed him, he also caused storm clouds to form over Egypt, for example, who worshiped multitudes of gods that God hated. And he caused them, especially during the time of Joseph, to prosper greatly, even though this was an idolatrous nation. He brought the rain down and blessed their crops so they can have the harvest, so they can store it for 7 years before the 7-year famine came. And Egypt was called a land of milk and honey. All right. And that phrase has to deal with how the Lord, how he designed, the land mass, and how the Lord sends the waters down, whether it be from the mountains through the rivers, and it, irrigates the land and is flourishing with fruits and crops. It means a land specially cared for by God. That's what the phrase means, basically. All right. Land specially cared for by God. And Egypt was called a land of milk and honey because of how careful God took care of that place. Now, there's a saying through Elihu, all right, when he was talking to Job, and he was talking about the use of the storms and the rain and how through it, though the storm scares you because of the lightning flash and the thunder sound of God's voice, yet he says, through that, God nourishes the people. So though it's scary when it approaches, like Florida right now with the hurricanes, yet when the hurricane coming is blowing and destroying stuff, water also comes down. All right. And when everything subsides, though there may be buildings destroyed and boats removed from their places and some people dead, yet some survive and got food. And the animals that survived got food. And the birds that came back after the hurricane passes. Got food. Because all that water causes worms and all these other things to come up the ground. Just like on a normal rainy day. And that's why Elihu said God sends these things for two reasons. To destroy the wicked and to have mercy on others. That's why he sends them. This is very important. So knowing that God sends disaster and the Lord sends blessings, or meaning rain, an increase of your, blessings of your womb, meaning more children. The Lord sends these things for two reasons. So when he was blessing Egypt, and it was called the land of milk and honey, and they had all these crops and stuff, and they would save it, and for 7 years, and then 7-year famine came, but they survived and all that kind of stuff because God had a divine person in the region named Joseph. All right. And then and because of that famine that came so bad, that curse that came so bad on the land of Canaan that caused Jacob and them to have to flee into Egypt, searching for food so their family survived. Now Joseph set up second in charge at this point, reveals himself to his family, and then puts them in Goshen. All right. So it's through the curse or famine, cursing the basket, cursing the store, cursing the field, that then through that disaster, God had mercy on Jacob. Some people died during the famine, but Jacob, who God cared for, him and his family survived. And they came on. I mean, not Jacob. Sorry, guys. Joseph's father. I forgot his name already. Isaac. I think it was Isaac, right? Isaac and Jacob. Yeah. So when the famine came and they had to flee, into the land, he revealed himself to his brothers, Benjamin and all of them. Anyway, Jacob, yeah. So bring them to the land and puts them in Goshen. All right. And so it was through that calamity that God had mercy and brought them there. And it was through this curse, right? Famine. Famine ain't no blessing. So, but that famine struck Canaan, all right? It struck the Gentiles. It struck where Jacob and his family and all of them were living. And all these other people that were in the region that the Bible don't talk about because it ain't focusing in on them. But all the other people that was in the land, they were affected too. And surely it wasn't just Joseph's family that went to Egypt to search for food. So, but the point is that through what the blessings, rain, and through the curses, famine, the Lord sends these things for two reasons: to destroy the wicked and to have mercy on others. And so Christ said, when it comes to the rain, which we would consider the blessings of God, as he opens the windows of heaven and shower down the blessing that causes us to be able to eat and survive, when the Lord stretches hope in the heavens, he doesn't just do it for the good. He does it for the evil too. That's very important, because when we go back to Deuteronomy and Moses tells the children of Israel, listen, all right, he tells them, if you obey the Lord and do all these commandments, all these blessings will come upon you. All right. And he started listing these blessings: rain, crops, increase in cattle, increase in children. All right. God protect you from your enemies. So if a nation try to invade you, they won't be successful. You'll be able to defend yourselves. So these are these blessings. Now, when you get into the curses, total opposite. If you disobey the Lord, which obviously they did, and do not keep all the words in which he commanded them that day, then all these curses will come upon thee and overtake thee. So the blessings will overcome you and overtake you. The blessings, proving that God has set you on high, but then the curses would have came and overtook you, proving God has set you on low or on the bottom. All right. So it says, and overtake thee. Cursed thou shalt be in the city, and cursed thou shalt be in the field. All right. So far, he tells the children of Israel, listen, when this happens to you, when these curses come upon you, don't be confused. God has brought you low to a humble state, brought you to the bottom. You're not on the top. You're on the bottom. All right. You're on the bottom. Now, this is important in context to what Christ said and what I'm trying to get you brothers and sisters to understand, according to what I told you in the beginning. But if anybody just coming in, my statement is that those who use Deuteronomy 28 to say this is only talking to the children of Israel, therefore, what you read in Deuteronomy 28 would only happen to the children of Israel, and it's through these curses, because they don't claim to be on top today, that these curses will come upon them and still upon them, and therefore, through these curses, you're able to tell who the Israelites is today. And that's why you have people like IUIC saying the blacks, Hispanics, and Native Americans are the Israelites, because they're looking at these curses. Then they look at these people group. I don't know how they only single them out. Looking at these curses, I don't know how they do it, but they do it. And so they say, look at these curses. Look at this one. Look at this one. Look at this one. Then they take you out through history books, whether it be pseudo or non-pseudo. They take you through history books, trying to connect their histories, ancient times to now. And they talk about migration patterns and when they fled into Egypt and all this. So they go through all of that and try to connect them with the curses, the bad calamities, to say, see, black man, Hispanic man, this is you. Look in your neighborhoods. Look at the way your people living. You're not on the top. You're on the bottom. Now, I agree to this extent. The hood ain't on the top. It's on the bottom. Look at all the evil that happens in there. Look how God continually beats and strikes that community. Not just those who physically live in the hood, all right? But the hood and ghetto is kind of used as the thumbnail picture for the black community as a whole, okay? So, yes, if we was to look at naturally black people in America, we'd be like, yo, we not on the top. We not above the other people in this land. Like, okay. And so it's going to be through that they're going to say, see, that means you're the Israelites. And that's when a mistake comes in that. Because Moses telling the children of Israel, when y'all see these curses come upon you, it is a sign from God that you are brought low. You're on the bottom. Moses did not say to the children of Israel, nowhere in the Torah or in Deuteronomy 28, that children of Israel, listen to me. When you see these curses, understand that they would only come upon you and always will be upon just you, and therefore you will know you're the Israelites. Two different things. The nations didn't have a Moses to teach them anything. Yet they were getting smite by the Lord. They were getting replaced out of their lands. Their homes were being taken over. Matter of fact, the Israelites took over their homes. They were getting taken out of their homelands. They were experiencing pestilence of diseases. They were going into captivity, killed with the sword, put on ships. They was going through all of that. But they ain't had no Moses sitting in front of them going, listen, when these things happen to you, this is why it's happening to you. They didn't have no guidance. They were a wild olive tree. So while all this stuff was happening, they didn't know exactly why it was happening. All right. But the children of Israel knew plainly because Moses told them, when you see these signs, God brought you low. You're on the bottom. So he says, you'll be cursed in your city. Not only your city will be cursed, but you will be cursed in the city. You will be cursed in your fields. Not just your fields would ever be cursed, but nevertheless, when this happens to your field, just know it's a curse. Your basket in your store will be cursed if you don't keep all the words of this covenant. You ain't the only people that God is going to curse on basket in the store, but nevertheless, when your basket in the store is cursed, just know God came against you. He talks about them going into captivity. He didn't say only you were going to captivity. He said, no, if you don't keep the words of this covenant God's making with you, you're going to captivity. It's just a matter of fact. It's not a message of exclusivity. Okay? It's just a statement of fact. When this happens to you, God is against you. All right? So, and this is through all the rest of the curses. So when he says down here, and these the main ones, or the main one, he says a couple of them. Let's in verse 49, he says, the Lord shall bring a nation against thee from far, from the end of the earth, as swift as the eagle flieth. Now, truly, he was talking about Nebuchadnezzar. Some extends this to Rome. Okay. All right. Others extend this even to America. But scripturally speaking, and the version you're going to find in the Bible, all right, you're going to see Babylon, you're going to see Rome. All right. It didn't say that his sign was the eagle. It said a nation from far, from the inner earth, as swift as an eagle flieth. So what the Lord is saying is they're far, they're far away from you. But as far as an eagle's flying through the sky, with keen eye, he can see his prey from miles away. And he clung up his wings and do that speed dive thing that they do. And they don't even stop. They just do this thing with their body and open up their wings and stick out their claws and grab their prey and take off. He says, though they be far, I'll send them directly to you, as swift as the eagle flieth. That's what the Lord said. A nation whose tongue you don't understand. A nation of fierce countenance, which shall not regard the person of old or show favor to the young. It talked about what he would do with the cattle, with the lamb, with the young, with the old, having no mercy. It talked about how he'll eventually, with yokes of iron around their necks, take them into captivity. Talks about the sons and daughters. Talk about how they're going to what's the word? Cannibalism. All right, that's what verse 56 is talking about. Talking about cannibalism and them eating the flesh of their own sons and daughters and being stingy and not sharing the meat of their own children with the rest of the family. All right, and so, but then he moves down and says, talk about the pestilence disease, but then he moves down to verse 68 and says, and the Lord shall bring thee into Egypt again, because God brought them out of Egypt the first time. Then he warned them twice. Once while they were still in Egypt, when Moses said, stand back, in Deuteronomy 17, I believe it was. He said, stand back, see the salvation of the Lord. For the Egyptians you see today, you shall see them no more forever. Then the Lord will warn them again. And he says, do not go back into Egypt for nothing, not to multiply horses, not for military aid, not for nothing. For the Lord has told you that these Egyptians that you have seen today, you shall return back and see them no more forever. But the Lord said, if you don't obey these words of the instructions I gave you this day, I'll send you back into Egypt again with ships. By the way whereof I spake unto thee, spake meaning in the past, by the way in which I told you in the past, you shall see it no more again. What way he told them in the past, prior to Deuteronomy 28? Literal Egypt, where the Egyptians were. Some say, no, this means captivity. All right. Even if you want to make it that, your claim will still be false. We'll get to that. And once you get there to Egypt, you shall be sold unto your enemies for bondmen and bondwomen. Some translation says you shall sell yourselves. And so people argue about that, and people like IOC will reject any translation that says you'll sell yourself. So since I'm trying to explain things to people who reject the scripture that says you should sell yourself, like the ancient Targums, and they only want to hold to the King James that says you shall be sold, because they're trying to make the whole oxen block thing. So since I'm talking to them, I have to talk to them the way that they're using this. All right. So even though I know it says you should sell yourself, King James Version says you shall be sold. All right. And that's why people are like, yo, this don't make sense, because it says you shall be sold for bondmen and bondwomen, and no man shall buy you. Like, that don't even make sense. All right. But the way that the people explain it is, look, you shall be sold on the auction blocks, and no man shall buy you, meaning redeem you from slavery. And historically speaking, even that breakdown brings problems, since many African slaves or Israelite slaves that were over here got redeemed out of slavery, literally. Some of them redeemed themselves, redeemed other family members. They got so redeemed, they got on the ship, went back over to Africa, and started a whole nation. All right? But nevertheless, for the people who will not understand or accept that, and only accepts what they've heard, which is you shall be bought for bondmen and slave men, bondwomen and slave men, and no man shall buy you, meaning redeem you out of captivity. So they say nobody redeem us but Christ. All right, fine. Now Moses didn't say to the Israelites, only you will God ever send into slavery into Egypt. Only you will God ever put on slave ships. Only you will be sold on auction blocks as slaves. And only you will be in a situation where nobody can redeem you. All he told them was, if you don't obey the words of the covenant, this is what will happen to you. All right. But using this to make the claim that it only happened to us and ask the question, who else had been through? Who else been through it and all this kind of stuff? Is dishonest use of the scriptures. And it's a perversion of what God was teaching in the law. Here's why. Let's go to the next chapter right quick, and then we'll come back. I'm not going to read all of this, all right, for my own physical strength's sake. But as you can see what I highlighted, the Lord tells them right after he tells them about the blessings and curses, who he's making this covenant with, all right? And so he tells them he's making it with the children of Israel, with all their men, all their women, all their children. Then it says the Lord is also, he's not only making this covenant with you people, but he's also making it with those who stand with them that day, which was the proselytes, the converts. This is why in the Jewish nation and Judaism and all that, this is why they capacity and land to make people converts. That's why they're still doing it today. That practice had long been done among them people. All right. To convert one unto their nation, or convert one unto their religion. All right. Unto their covenant that God made. This is why Gentiles became circumcised, became known as proselytes of the gates and all this other stuff. All right. So, but he says, I'm not only making this with you only, but also with the people who stand here with us this day. All right. Meaning the proselytes and the other people that were there, that were their servants and, at the time. And also with the future generation that's not there that day, meaning the future children of the Israelites, as well as the foreigners who sojourned among them that had children, all right, that were converts. And so the covenant was not only made with the nation of Israel alone. It was made with the children of Israel, but it had remnants of other nations intertwined with them. All right. And so those people that were intertwined with Israel were, in God's sight, seen as Israel. They were known as, or even what's the word I'm looking for? Related to and thought of as one with that nation. That's why in the law, when it talks about loving your neighbor as yourself and all this other stuff, it mentioned the native born, treating them and loving them as you love yourself. And then verse 35 of Leviticus 19 then tells you about the foreigner that sojourns among you, that the Israelites were to view them as native born brothers and sisters and love them as they love themselves. That's why it says that. All right. So knowing this, that when God made this covenant after giving all them blessings and curses warnings, made the covenant with not only the children of Israel, but also the foreigners that sojourn among them, meaning the converts. And so that means they all fell under those rules, all right, of the blessings and curses. When the Lord opened up the windows of heaven and rained down in the nation of Israel, and they got harvest season and crops and all that, the proselytes that sojourn among them also shared in those blessings. When the Lord sent a nation against them and they burning up cities and slinging folks with the swords, you best believe them proselytes were caught in the midst of that too. All right. So being that the Lord said this, and so knowing that is the reality, and when you read the Old Testament, like Jeremiah 27, Jeremiah 28, I know a lot of stuff I'm not going to go to physically. I'm just quickly showing it because I want to get to the main points. In Jeremiah chapter 27, chapter 28 is when Babylon came, or was about to come, and take over the children of Israel, fulfilling what Moses said to them. But as the children of Israel being taken into captivity with yokes of iron around their neck during that time, also the nation of Edom, Ammon, Moab, King of Tyre, Sidon, and their ruling provinces. They were all taken into captivity together with yokes of iron around their necks. All right. And so they too fulfilled what Moses told to the children of Israel. All right. Which is one example that proves, yes, that Moses was talking to the children of Israel and the proselytes among them in the wilderness, warning them to keep this covenant of God, lest these things happen to them. But this proves that he did not say that in the time or in history, only these things would only happen to them. That's not what he said. All right. And it's proven because when the fulfillment of what Moses said came upon them, the same thing came upon the other people. All right. And when the blessings that Moses said upon the children of Israel came about, that same rain that caused the crops to grow and all that came upon the other people. And when God touched the womb of the Israelite women, he also produced children in the other nations. There's only one God that creates all children and all humans of the world. All right. So there's no special thing that happened to the Israelites that only happened to them. All right. And so all nations share this history. Whether you know who they are literally or don't know who they are literally, they all happen to them because the Lord is the same today, yesterday, and forever. There's no shift and shadow in him. He has no favorites. Just as Christ said, he caused the rain to fall on the good and the evil alike. He didn't preserve the rain just for good people. So knowing this, the question is asked then, well, Pastor Jay and whoever else, who else went through these curses? And the main one they really concerned about is Deuteronomy 28:68. Okay. That's the one they're really mainly concerned about. All right. About going into Egypt again with ships. We'll get to that. But let's start here. All right. What they won't tell you. Let's see here. I think is this the one I'm looking for? All right. So some of you may or may not know that obviously there was a lot more to slavery than the translate slave trade. The translate slave trade, is as bad as it was just a small part of something that was way bigger going on, that was way worse and lasting way longer. Okay. The translate slave trade was an annex, meaning an addition to a slave trade that had been going on for centuries at that point, which was the sub-Saharan slave trade that was taking place in the northeastern Africa, and especially in the regions where the Ottoman Empire and all that, and the Muslims ran the world, right? So, and in those regions, let me get a map right quick. Let me take this down right fast and get a map. All right. Let me see if I can blow it up. All right. We'll roll with this one. All right. So the sub-Saharan slave trade, and this is the closest it's gonna let me get. Let's see how big I can blow this up. All right. Can I slide it over? All right, here we go. All right. What the world? All right, hold on, y'all. Oh, it took me to that for some reason. Here we go. All right. I don't want to go to the store. Okay, there we go. All right. All right, that's better. All right. So the sub-Saharan slave trade was taking place in this region here, along these edges here, well, especially around in this area here. All right. And then you had some regions up here. You had the Ottoman Turks ruling, these empires here. You had the they don't have the name of the seas here, but you got the Black Sea. I think that's the Black Sea right there. You had the Mediterranean Sea, which is this region around here. All right. And so you had the Barbary pirates. You had the Barbary states, which is like a little union of nations, basically. That was part of that whole thing. But there were ship raiders that would raid ships. They would invade the coastal lands of the British people, and they would take them via ships and bring them down into these regions where the slave market was at. All right, in the Barbary states, or the where the sub-Saharan slave trade was going on. So you had white people coming down mainly from this region, and you had blacks being taken and brought on slave markets from this region and stuff like that. All right, and you even had some Egyptians, which was against the law at that time, but you had some Egyptians taking as slaves as well, and they put all in the slave market. It was a big mixed up slave market of white and black people. All right. Now, the people that was invading and stealing these white folks and bringing them down into the slave markets were black people. All right. In Northeast Africa, these Muslims, all right, these Barbary pirates and all that. These black. So outwardly looking wise, you would say these are black people. So black people were invading and taking white slaves via ships. All right. Bringing them down to the slave market. Then black people was going into these regions too, taking other black people and bringing them up to the slave markets as well. Then from there, you had some white people, some black people, some native people, or we know as Native Americans. On this side, you had some Indian people, you had some Chinese people, and you had the slave markets from here, sub-Saharan slave trade, and they were sending slaves off in this direction, which we became known as the transatlantic slave trade. They were sending slaves off as they sold them, and they came down to these ports, sent them off this direction, which we know as the East African slave trade, send them up in India and all these other little regions. Some of them staying in the regions as sex workers, especially like in the Ottoman Empire and all that, and as concubines and all that kind of stuff, and some as field slaves, and some sent in these regions. So the slave trade was sending people all over the place, all right? That's the point. And the people that were being sold on auction blocks were white people, outwardly speaking, just to make this easy for American folks, white people and black people. And the people selling them was black people. And the people buying them was black people and white people and people you would call Native American, people you would call Indian, people you would call Chinese. So everybody got their little hands in here, all right? So nevertheless, for centuries, the transatlantic slave trade was going on. I mean, not transatlantic, the sub-Saharan slave trade. And there was an annex or an addition to that, which became known as the transatlantic slave trade that took place off the west coast of Africa, which most people know about, all right? So when we talk about Egypt, going into Egypt again with ships, all right? Egypt, not just Egypt, the physical, Egypt land, but also their wherever they ruled at, wherever their borders extended to, sent into Egypt again with ships. And even if they want to make the argument, ain't talking about literal Egypt, where the children of Israel came from. That word is synonymous with captivity. All right, that's even worse. Because if it's send you into captivity again with ships, then yes, Moses was talking to the Israelites, but that wasn't the only people that fulfilled such curse. Because you had the British, as I'm going to show you in a second, I think that's called the Ciceronians. I probably jacked that pronunciation up, but the Ciceronians, meaning just for the American folks, they're not really white people, but if you talk to Americans, they'd be considered white people, all right? And they're from the Caucasus regions, all right? Caucasus Mountains. They were also taken as slaves. They were exiled. They were taken over by the Russians, all right? The Russians attacked them, all right? And slayed them with the sword, exiled them, took them into captivity, sold them into slave markets. They became sex slaves and all this other stuff, all right, to black people. And to other white people, other Russians and stuff like that. So, but the point is that sent into captivity on ships was fulfilled, at least by what I'm telling you guys right now. It's been fulfilled by, there's been Egyptians that fulfilled such thing. There's been non-Egyptians but were black, like the Negroes, that fulfilled that, going into slavery in ships. There were white that would be considered Caucasians that fulfilled going into slavery on ships. There were also people that aren't technically white, but if you talk to Americans, white, like the Ciceronians, that also fulfilled going to slavery on ships from the Black Sea down into the regions of the Barbary states, the Ottoman Empire that ruled. All right. So this is stuff that's going on. And that's not even counting the East African slave trade that came from the east coast of Africa into regions like India and these other islands over here. More black people, sold by black people, Caucasian people. This is how you have a whole bunch of white people down in South Africa. And they're in the slums. And they're on the bottom. They're not blessed. They're cursed. They got pestilence of diseases. They're on the bottom of society down there. Black people come first there. So if we're talking about brought to the bottom and the curses, white people and black people both fulfilled those things, because Moses did not say only you would go through these things. He just told them you would go through these things. That's all he said. All right. Now, being that the children of Israel were called by the Lord and given a covenant, them understanding these things was very important, because they were going to be lessons or the objects of God's lesson that he's going to teach, not just to Israel, but also to the nations who come into the knowledge of his law. Because remember what he told the children of Israel in chapter 6, I believe it was. In verse, let's see here. In verse, a quick second here. I think it's in chapter 6. Let me make sure. Let me just type it in. Hold on. Chapter 4. All right. All right. In chapter 4, Deuteronomy, look at what Moses said to Israel. Said, keep therefore and do them, meaning all the commandments he commanded them, meaning that covenant. For this is your wisdom and understanding in the sight, not out of sight, but in the sight of the nations, which shall hear all these statutes. Meaning the nation's going to hear these commandments of the Lord. They're going to hear it. They're going to come into the knowledge of his rules. And they're going to say, surely this is a great nation. Surely this great nation is a wise and understanding people. And this is why Israel is supposed to be a light to the nations, so that they can be the example of uprightness, whom God is, meaning them walking in the light and obeying his commandments, so that the nations, when they look at the children of Israel and hear of these commandments and see how the Lord has blessed them from on high, the people would then become fond of the Israelites, fond of God, fond of his ways, and say, when they hear these statutes, say, surely this is a wise and understanding people. And so they say, for what nation is there so great? This is what the people are going to say. For what nation is so that there is so great, who have God so nigh unto them, as the Lord our God is in all things which we call upon him for? And what nation is there so great that have statutes and judgments so righteous as all this law which I set before you this day? So Moses said, keep these commandments, so that the nations who would then come to hear these commandments would then become so fond of you, fond of God, fond of his ways, that they would say, surely it's a wise and understanding people, for who has a God so nigh to them? And who got statutes and judgments so wise? I mean, you think about the purification rituals. You think about the when the people is unclean, you put them outside the camp so that everybody else remain pure. You think about the judgments. If you stole from a person, give them back 7 times what you took. Like, when you think about these restitution commands and how God viewed fighting and how God viewed, stealing from folks, and, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. If you, hit a pregnant woman by accident and the baby's born lame, therefore make that man who harmed the baby, make him lame. You think about judgments like that. The nation will hear it and they become impressed. And they be like, oh my goodness, this is wise. This is an understanding people. They have a God real close to them. No other nations has a God so close to them as these folks. And that will cause the people to then want to convert and join them. That was the whole point. That was the whole point. So now, being that if they had obeyed and the Lord set them on high and showed these blessings, and the nations see them, and the nations become impressed, and the nations now want to cleave. People out of the nations want to cleave because they see the wisdom among them and see how close God is to them. But what happens if God curses them? This is why you see in the curses. Let's go back to 28. It said, when they was cursed, when they become cursed, when they didn't obey that first covenant, it said that this is what's going to happen to them in the sight of the nations. Instead of nations be like, oh, so wise, God so close to them. Oh, man, and they want to join in. It said, when the Lord curses them, it then said, this is what will happen in the sight of the nations. It'll say, let's see here. Where is it? Right here. In verse 36 said, the Lord shall bring thee and thy king, which thou shalt set over thee, unto a nation which thou nor thy fathers have known, and there thou shalt serve other gods, wood and stone, gods that are not close to them. And it says, and thou shalt become an astonishment. The nation's going to look at them this time, but see on how they brought to the low to the bottom, how they don't got a God close to them because they're worshiping false gods. And since they brought it from God's law, they ain't going to hear the wise sayings. They ain't going to see the righteous judgments performed to make them become intrigued and to make them want to join, these people and cleave to them and get to know their God. Instead, now, while they're on the bottom and curse, now the people they're in front of is going to look at them and they're going to become astonishment, shaking of the head. Whoa, man. Man. A proverb. They're going to have little sayings. And a byword among the nations which the Lord shall lead thee into. So, through the blessings by them obeying, God was going to use that to draw the attention of outsiders, to draw them to himself. But then also, flip side, through the curses, the Lord would then let the children of Israel be a teaching lesson to all the nations that observe them. So it's not that these things only happen to them. It's just that they were a teaching lesson of God to other nations. Why is that? Like I said before, the nations were getting smited by God before the children of Israel ever got in the land to get a curse. Who experienced being scattered out of their homeland? The Canaanites, Jebusites, Perizzites. Them people did. Who first experienced another nation coming and taking over your homes? They did. Who experienced the pestilence and drought and famine? The Egyptians and them other people did. Not the Israelites. Who else went into captivity before the Israelites did? Once they got in the land? The people that they took over. They went into captivity. And when the people exiled, they then had to be scattered to other nations that wasn't their own nation. So they became servants through exile. You don't exile and become the leader of that nation you exiled into. No, you become part of their society, but you ain't on the top. All right? So this became of those people before it became of the Israelites. But as I said, as Moses said to the children of Israel in Deuteronomy 9, when he told the children of Israel, don't be proud. Don't think because you're so good you get in this land. He says, it ain't because you're so good. He says, for the wickedness, the sins of these nations, that the Lord is driving them out. He's scattering them for their sins. But they had no law from Sinai or anything like that. Yet God said they sinned before him. So he scattered them. But they ain't had no prophets to say, the Lord God of Israel, the Lord God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob said, because you sinned against him, you going into captivity. They didn't have that. All they know is they got their little pagan society going on. And then one day the Jews show up, taking them into captivity, slaying them, exiling them. That's all they know. But the Lord told Moses to tell the children of Israel the reason why he's using them and scattering them out is because of those people's sins, which is breaking God's law. All right. So they didn't have a clear clue as to why calamity came upon them like that. So imagine being a Jebusite, scattered out of your land one day, no clue why it's happening. All you know is we was taking over and they're taking over our land. They're taking over our houses and they're taking our kids. That's all you know. All right. So part of you people get scattered. Some of you remain as slaves, like some of them did. And while you slaves, the children of Israel, you hear them reading about the law, and they're teaching you about their God. All right? So you overhear them saying these commandments, and overhear them talking about their God as they read the law of Moses. So you listen. Some of you convert. Some of you don't. Some of you convert and come to know that God through your slave masters. You come to know that God. Some of them don't. But while you're hearing about it, you hear about the blessings, you hear about the curses. And then one day, these people decide they want to depart from the Lord. And God decides, well, I'm going to send a nation against them for far. Send them into captivity. You'll become astonishment among these folks. So now when the curses come, the Gentiles that was close to the Israelites that heard the law, that heard Moses say, if they obeyed, this will happen. And if they disobeyed, this will happen. when they disobey and now the curses come, the people that was once of the people group that got thrown out the first time, when they see this happen to the Israelites, they'll know why it's happening to them folks, because they heard it. And they'll know their God came against them. Why that God came against them? He drew them out of the land. Why he drew them out of the land? Because they didn't keep his commandments. And then they start to see what happened to them. Man, they got driven out just like my people got driven out before they got here, when they got here. Oh, man, their kids got taken just like my kids got taken when they came in here. Oh, man, this is famine. Oh, we was experiencing that too, man. I remember when I was a baby girl, that famine came right before these people came. Then all of a sudden, through Israel being a teaching lesson, the nations that once did not know God and didn't know why these evils was coming upon them, now, through the example of Israel, now come to know why God took their kingdom from top and brought them on the bottom. Then they'll realize it's because we sinned against this God. Am I making this up? No, this is why the apostle said this. And then I'll show you this thing I want to show you. This is why the apostle said this in the book of Acts. Sorry, not 27, 17. That's why the apostle said this to the Greeks when he was talking to them. He said, He said, God that made the world and all things therein, verse 24, seeing that he is Lord of both heaven and earth, and dwelleth not in temples made by hands, not the temple made by the Israelites' hands, and not the temples made by the Gentiles' hands. He don't dwell in those temples that are made by men's hands. He says, not that he's worshipped with men's hands as though he needed anything. Seeing he giveth to all life. He didn't just give Israelites life, he gave all life. He gave the Edomites life, he gave the Muslims life, he gave the Ammonites life, he gave the Israelites life, he gave the Philistines life, he gave all them life, the Christians life. He gave all the nations life, all the animals life. He gave it to all life and breath and all things. All that they got, God gives it to them. If they got a land, God gave it to them. If the land got taken away, God took it from them. If they got a child, God gave it to them. If the child died, God took the child. If they got food, God fed them. If they starved to death, God is withholding meat. He gives them everything. If they got health, God gave it to them. If their health declined, God took it from them. If they blind, God took their sight. If they got sight, God gave it to them. He gives them everything, Jew and non-Jew. But it said, not only does he give them all things, it says, and have made from one blood, meaning Adam, all nations of men. For what purpose? To dwell on all the face of the earth. And God has determined the times beforehand, appointed for each of these people groups, the times appointed. Some translations plainly tell you the rise and fall. God determined the rise and fall of each kingdom of the world. All kingdoms have experienced it. They've all been set high at one point, and they've all been brought low. And it says the time of the rise and fall and the bounds of their habitations, meaning where they would live. The Lord put those nations in the land of Canaan. Before the Israelites got there, it was their land. Then the Lord said, I'm going to give this to the children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So how he's going to give it to them? Well, the people that he gave the land to first were a bunch of corrupt sinners. And so, well, it was time to judge them for their sins. So he brought the children of Israel and used them as his sword, and he took them people over, cast them out of the land, took over their homes, killed their kids, sent them off into captivity, and all these different things because of their sins. And as a result of that, he took away the borders or boundaries that he gave them and handed it over to the Israelites as an inheritance. But why did he do it? What was the point? The point of that, what I was just explaining to you 5 minutes ago, he did this so that they, meaning the nations, would seek the Lord. And not only seek the Lord, if happily they might feel after him. They're like blindly. They're like this. They're seeking after the Lord. So as the Lord sent them into captivity, and they got no clue why it's happening because they ain't had no prophets, they ain't had no scriptures or nothing. But here's Moses telling the children of Israel, and now God is using the Israelites as the the symbol of his teaching, and now he brings them up high, and the nations observe it, and some of them become impressed and they convert. Then when they sin, God brings them low, and he curses them, and the other nations look at them, and they be like, dang, man, what did they do to make this God mad? That God is against them. But through observing the children of Israel, they'll learn a lesson, and they'll think back on their own peoples and how these things they're observing that's happening to the Israelites happen to their people too. And as they hear those statutes and those warnings and those sins, then for some of them, they will feel after God, and they may happily find him, though he be not far from any one of them. He's not far from any person that's white, any person that's black, Chinese, whatever nation. I don't know all the nations' names. But if you exist and you're a human being, God is not far from any one of you, because you have life from him. Everything you own, you got from him. If you have a child, if you're pregnant, that God is forming the baby in your womb, sisters, presently. Whether you be a Jew or a Gentile. And he takes his precious time, giving it all the things in which he wants. And if your baby come out healthy, God bless you. And even if your baby come out blind, God still bless you, but the baby's got blindness. And that blindness may last for all their life. Or, so that the power of God may be manifest in the world, he may have your child be a teaching lesson of God's miraculous power as he sends one of his ministers to touch your child or pray for your child, and a miracle happens and they get their sight back. Wherever the Lord's decision is. But the point is, he's not far from anyone. So the Lord's not far from anyone, but not everybody knows him. So he has to reveal himself to them. And he reveals himself through his word. And he gave his word unto Jacob, and his statutes and judgments unto Israel. They were the first fruits called of God. All right? Meaning they got called out of Egypt and given a covenant, and they were supposed to be the light to the nations. But it wasn't really about them. It was about the one that would come from them, or from the midst of them. Meaning Jesus Christ of Nazareth. And through him, who Hosea talked about and said, when Israel was a child, then I loved him, and out of Egypt have I called my son. And that was referring to Jesus Christ. So Jesus Christ is the true Israel, the prince that has power with God. God's son. If God be the king, then Christ is surely the prince. Even though he's also the king. But anyway, and it's through Christ that all the nations will then come and be reconciled and joined to the Father as they hear of his commandments, as they hear of the commandment, meaning the gospel, to believe, and as they hear of Christ's teachings, and they see how close God is to his people of this new covenant. So close, he's in them. And now it's the whole purpose and plan of God with Deuteronomy, with the Bible itself, but especially with Deuteronomy. We're talking about blessings and curses. They were to serve as teaching lessons, signs or teaching lessons, and serve as warnings for God's people today to not crave after evil things like Israel did, because there's a worse calamity coming in the future than anything you ever read in Deuteronomy. But for the people that say, who else been through these curses? I talked about it a little bit with that map, but I want to show y'all something right quick. Slavery in Egypt. All right. Not slavery in the USA, but slavery in Egypt, because that's what Deuteronomy's talking about. All right. This is more recent time. This ain't even like ancient. All right. But in the 19th century, Egypt, Circassian females were mostly kept in the harems of wealthy Turks. All right. In the Ottoman Empire. The concubines of middle-class Egyptians generally were Abbasians, while male and female Negro slaves were used for domestic service by almost all layers of Egyptian society. In addition to domestic service, black slaves were used as soldiers by Egypt's rulers, and contrary to the prevalent assumption, as agricultural workers on the farms of the Muhammad Ali family and elsewhere in Upper Egypt, and during periods of prosperity and shortage of labor also in Lower Egypt. Apparently, there were at least 30,000 slaves in Egypt at different times of the 19th century, and probably many more. Now, I want to start by saying this right quick before I read on. I'm reading this history, but the reason I'm reading the history is so that through it, we can discern God's works and what he was doing. All right? That's why we're doing this. Discerning God's work and why he was doing it. So what we see so far is this, is that the Caucasian people, God had came against. All right? He came against them. Why would God set himself against these folks? Because they sins. Ain't no blessing when God sets himself against you. And then he allows for your people to be taken over, as I'm going to show you guys in a second in a little documentary clip thing. Not only taken over, but killed, sold as slaves, exiled from your homeland, where you remain exiled to this day. What would make God turn against the people, send them into captivity, have them taken over, have their families killed, and sent into slavery via ships, too? What would make him do that? It's his judgment against sin. So far, the Caucasians are under what we would perceive as the curse, okay? The curses, all right? Not only them, but the Abasians, all right? Or Abyssians. Not only them, but the Negroes. Us, black folks. What would make God set his face against us? Our ancestors. His face ain't against me now. But what would make God set his face against Negroes? Yeah, we can read the history and be like, oh, these folks came in there and they took them and this is what they did with them. But why would God set his face and allow this? It ain't a blessing. He's angry for some reason. Why? Unless you're God's people and you're obeying and you're fulfilling what Christ said, when Christ said that those who followed him, he said, you will be hated by the world. So don't be surprised. And he warned the church and said, some of you will be killed with the sword, meaning martyrs. Some of you will be led away as slaves into captivity. But suffer these things, even until death, and you receive a crown. So outwardly speaking, those who are God's people will be treated outwardly the same as those who God is against. But the difference is that the purpose for God's people going through these outward calamities is not so to be destroyed, but so that they be glorified. For it's been told to us that if we want to be glorified with Christ, we must also suffer for him. So suffering isn't a sign for believers that God is against you. It's a sign of God's love and you being glorified with Christ in the future. But for those who God is against, those who live contrary to his rules, when they go into captivity, it's till thou be destroyed. So the Caucasians, the Abyssinians, the Negroes, and in those groups were also Christians. Like when you talk about the Slavic slave trade, a lot of them were white Christians. All right. So, and they were all sold in the same markets, in the same slave trade. The sub-Saharan slave trade was full of idolatrous black and white folks being sold, as well as black and white Christians being sold. They were all there in the slave market. That's a fact. That's just a fact of life. All right. And so then it says white slaves were brought to Egypt. White slaves were brought to Egypt from the eastern coast of the Black Sea. Where that map at? Thought I blew one up. Black Sea over here. All right. This is the Black Sea area. They were brought from the eastern coast, because that's where the ports were normally located, the coastlines, from the eastern coast of the Black Sea. All right. And then they were brought and bought and sold in those slave markets there, known as the sub-Saharan slave trade. So white slaves were brought to Egypt via ships from the eastern coast of the Black Sea and from the Caucasian settlements of Anatolia via Istanbul, Turkey. Istanbul, Turkey. All right, let's go back. This is Turkey region. All right. You got Syria, Iraq, and all that stuff, and then you get on down here in the Mediterranean Sea area where you got the sub-Saharan slave trade going on. So they were bringing people from these regions, especially when you talk about the Caucasians, because they were taken over by the Russians, and they were taken over in the Caucasian regions, the Caucasus regions, around this area here in Georgia, Russia. And they were taken to the east coast, the eastern coastline of the Black Sea, and taken over and sold as slaves in Istanbul, Turkey, in the region where the Ottoman Turks ruled around these regions right here. All right. Excuse me. It says brown and black slaves were brought from Darfur to Ashuk, how do you pronounce that? Directly through Kordofan, from Sennaar and Ishnia, from the area of White Nile, from Bornu, and these other nations, these other names I don't know how to pronounce, Libya and the Western Desert, from Abyssinia and East African coast through the Red Sea. All right. If I'm not mistaken, I believe this is the Red Sea right here. All right. Right in this region right here. So black slaves were brought. And even though that looked like a little sliver of water, you need a ship to get across that. So you need boats. All right. So black slaves were brought on boats into the Egypt region or from the Egypt regions, sold in slave markets. White slaves were brought via ships into the Istanbul, Turkey, from the Caucasus regions and from the other regions where the Bari pirates and all that stuff was happening, through the Mediterranean Sea, through the Black Sea, and sold in these slave markets. All right. All right. So let's just stop right there right now. All right. So far, what we're establishing right now is black and whites were being sold at the same time, and they both was transported via slave ships, all right, and sold on auction blocks where they were sold and bought as bondmen and bondwomen, all right. Is this the one I want? Let's see. Let's see here. Let me make sure this is the one I want. I think it's a shorter one. I want y'all to see this. And for those who got foolish minds, no, I am, not trying to lift up the white people or trying to save the white man or any of these other dumb stuff that people be talking about. This is to establish that the dishonest use of the scriptures in a quest for truth and lying to black people and to Hispanics and asking them a question on the spot, such as who else been through these curses, and then try to convince them no one else has, only us. It's foolish and it's a dishonest thing, and you're deceiving people, because Moses did not say this would only happen to the Israelites. Instead, he said, Israel, when you don't obey, these things will happen to you. This is a fact. These things will happen to you. It's not to the exclusion of it happening to other people. Clearly, as you read Jeremiah 27, 28, and other passages in scriptures, where these same curses come upon other people that weren't Israelites. And even in the modern era time, where like with the Caucasians and people like that taking over and sold, and children taken from them, and they exiled out their homelands and their house taken over and sold into slavery on auction blocks via ships. These people are all going through the same thing. So why? Why was the whole purpose of it? Why was God blessing and cursing everybody? What do you want them to learn? What knowledge do you want them to come into? What was his point of this? Surely it was the point that through those things, they would feel after the Lord and possibly find them. for he's not far from any one of us. So I want y'all to see this right quick.
May the 21st is a dark day for Circassians, expelled from their homeland in 1864, which they had defended for more than 3 centuries. Circassians, who were predominantly Muslim, suffered greatly under the Russian Empire and were banished from their homeland in 1864. Imperial Russian records claim that more than 400,000 Circassians...
Let's go back. All right. They were exiled, taken over by the Russians, the Black Sea here, via ships. Look where they got sent. Istanbul, Turkey area here. All right. According to the map, where is that right there? That's Romania, Ukraine, Poland, and Greece and all that kind of stuff. That's what's over there. All right, so they got sent into those areas. Then when they got in those areas, remember there were slave markets in Istanbul, Turkey, that then these people ended up being sold on the auction blocks in the Ottoman Empire, which was part of the Sub-Saharan slave trade, all right, which was going on down in these regions, all right.
64. Imperial Russian records claim that more than 400,000 Circassians were killed during the mass exile, and according to unofficial estimates, nearly 1.5 million Circassians were deported during that same period. So, what happened in 1864? Circassians had been protecting their homeland against the aggression of the Russian Empire since the 1500s. In the 1800s, violence peaked. The Russian army marching towards the inland of the Caucasus Mountains started to systematically exterminate and force Circassians to emigrate. Russian troops attacked villages where families of Circassian soldiers lived, but the Circassians refused Russification and resettlement within the Russian Empire. The final battle took place in May 1864, ending with a Russian victory.
All right, so they were defending their homeland, the Circassians, and the Russians were coming against them. They had been successfully defending their land for centuries, but now in 1864, in May 1864, they lose. Now remember, every time there's a war, it's either going to end either in the nation defending their land, winning and successfully defending, which showed that God was on their side and allowed them to stay in their land, whether they worship him or not. And the other people that's trying to invade them lose. So the Lord fought them off. That's what happened. All right. Or the nation defending their land, trying not to be invaded, is invaded. Therefore, God has handed them over into the hands of these other folks. Why? Because of some sins that's going on in their land. God is judging them. Or while fighting, they, let's say, it ends in some kind of ceasefire, treaty thing is made, and they become allies for some reason. Those are only 3 things that's going to happen. In this case, the Circassians were taken over. So God handed them over into the hands of their enemies. The same way he handed the children of Israel over into their enemies. He hands them over to their enemies, which then leads to them being sold and exiled, taking over the Black Sea on ships into the Turkish regions, where they were then sold on auction blocks to the Ottoman Turks, who then deported some of them and all this other stuff into the Sub-Saharan slave trade, where they then got scattered to other regions of the world. All right.
And leaving the Circassians with no choice but to leave their homeland. However, the road to exile turned into a tragedy. The journey lasted for days by land and sea, and thousands died from starvation, epidemics, and shipwrecks. Today, Circassians, whose population is estimated to be around 8 million, live in all 4 corners of the world.
So the Circassians, as a result of their exile and dispersion from their homeland, taken over by the Russian Empire, deported, some fled, some killed, pestilence of disease, shipwreck. As a result of what happened to them, what God did to them, he exiled them from their homeland and scattered them to the 4 corners of the world. where they're currently at today. Some of them here in America, according to the map. Okay? So, in the four corners of the world, meaning on both sides of the hemispheres, upper and lower, the Circassians are as a result of their dispersion. And their dispersion, or the diaspora, took place, as you can see, in 1864. That's when they were taken over. And so from 1864 and for the years after that was where this scattering is taking place. And then eventually over the centuries, they ended up being scattered to the four corners of the world, according to this map. So the years in which all this took place was during the same time frame as the transatlantic slave trade, which was going on, which was an annex of the sub-Saharan slave trade. So while the blacks that were sold into the sub-Saharan slave trade by other blacks were being deported and sold as slaves on auction blocks and stuff from Africa to then be brought to auction blocks in Americas and sold as slaves, you had the white slaves being taken over in exile and scattered to the four corners of the world through the same slave trade. All right. It's all going around the same time frame.
With the majority residing in Turkey. Every year, on May the 21st, Circassians from all over the world commemorate the killing and deportation of their ancestors in 1864.
All right. I want to show y'all a little excerpt from the longer one that I had up first. Very important thing that's said in it. Hold on. And I want to show y'all this image to kind of hit it home. Let me see where it's at here.
Little wars were fought out between Christendom and Islam. And it's no coincidence, I don't think, that a lot of the guys I've been writing about in the 16th, 17th century, they referred to themselves as mujahideen. They were warriors for God. They talked about being on jihad. They were on sea jihad to push back the encroaching infidel. They were pushing back Christendom.
They're operating out of ports along this whole Barbary coast and preying on what kind of shipping in the Mediterranean?
They're preying on any kind of Christian shipping they can find. So it's mainly merchant shipping, and most of it is engaged in the Levant trade. That is a hugely lucrative trade between Smyrna, in fact, Constantinople, Istanbul. Ironically, we're engaged in trade. The West is in trade with the Ottoman Empire. And a lot of English, French, Dutch, Spanish ships are moving along the Mediterranean to trade with the Greek islands, to trade with Aleppo in Syria, to trade, as I say, with Smyrna and Constantinople. And they're ripe for the picking. They're not treasure ships. They're not like the great Spanish treasure fleets. But then again, the pirates that I've been writing about aren't just after treasure. Sure, they want treasure when they can find it, but they'll take anything. They'll take the ship. They'll take the cargo, even if it's olive oil or currants or whatever, they can sell it. And very importantly, they'll take the crew. Piracy, and in fact the states of Algiers and Tunis and Tripoli depended on slavery. The economies of these states depended on capturing slaves and ransoming them or selling them on. Something like 1 million Europeans were sold into slavery on the Barbary coast in the 17th century.
That's an appalling number. I mean, men, women, children, and so
I know how people get triggered when they see like the slave movies that's depicting the transatlantic slave trade and got the white people selling the black people and everybody, you know how that can get people ruffled around here. But look at this picture. A whole bunch of black people selling off white people, making them sex slaves, sex trafficking, and having sex with their kids, and strip some of them naked. I just want to kind of look at the image, see if people, feel the same way about slavery when they see it like this. It's an evil. It's an evil that the Lord allows to take place in the world for the reasons that I said before. It's so that all the nations in which he created will feel after him. No one will seek after God until they're humbled. Man by nature is prideful. When God is blessing them and they continue to walk in wickedness, yet they continue to eat and have comforts, creaturely comforts, they don't seek after the Lord. They forget the Lord. Men seek the Lord when they're humble, when they're brought low, when they're missing calamities, when the Lord got their attention, when they're in the pit. So the Lord allows all the nations to have their time of creaturely comforts as they experience his blessings, even if they hate them. But then eventually the Lord brings them all low for the purpose of that the remnant among them that he's going to have mercy on will feel after him and find him when he's got their attention, when they're in the pit, when they're on the bottom. For the black community, to go through all the atrocities and stuff like that they go through even today, while most of them are like upset and finding non-Christ outlets to deal with their matters, the purpose of it in the plan of God for the wicked is to destroy them simply. But for the people that he's going to have mercy upon, while they're in the pit, he's going to get their attention like he did with David. And they're going to hear the gospel of Christ. And since they were humbled, they will receive them. Because they wouldn't have seen them when they was enjoying them creaturely comforts. So this is the wisdom of God. This is why slavery, something so bad, something so evil. They're raping people and selling men as slaves, as possessions and stuff. This has been going on. Look at how slavery's been. It's the oldest. It's the oldest industry to ever exist. It's the oldest industry to ever exist. Taking over other humans, making them your servants. All right? Stealing men, selling them in auction blocks, treating them like cattle. It's the oldest industry to ever exist. It's possibly the ultimate sign of hatred towards their fellow man. But God allows it. And people wonder why he allow it. If he want nothing bad to happen. Well, the problem is men naturally hate God. They're prideful. They think all their ways are pure. They're haughty and high-minded. Think highly of themselves. Think so less of God. So, God allows you to be taken into captivity, beaten, your possessions taken, your comforts taken away. And while you're in the pit, maybe he'll get your attention. So this is the oldest industry to ever exist. One of the ultimate signs of hatred towards your brother, outside of murdering him. Yet, this is what happens. I find it interesting, that, black people, the black Muslims and the Ottoman Turks and all these folks, selling people as slaves. And not too long after that, and all of a sudden, you got these colonization things going on. And you got the white people taking over people. And the people being taken over, always act like they've been angels. They ain't done no evil. They ain't done nothing to nobody. They don't deserve this. They would just join God, join life, join their family, kumbaya, and peace, utter peace, and holiness in their lands. And then all of a sudden, some evil person came and took them over and took all their stuff and took all their kids and just beat them and raped them. And that's the way they talk. Like they've been angels, don't deserve nothing, and all this bad stuff happened for no reason. God don't bring no calamity for no reason. Every nation's been through this. They all been taken as slaves, exiled out their lands, scattered. The very first scattering, God performed it at Babel. Every other scattering, God still does it, but it ain't the way he did it in Babel. Instead, it's through handing over people into people's hands as he judges them. Hand the children over into children of Israel over into some people's hands, and some people over into the children of Israel's hands, vice versa, vice versa, vice versa, until eventually everybody's scattered, jumbled up throughout the world. God gave every nation a boundary of land in which them and their ancestors inherited from God, and their people lived at in safety and peace. But it was not to be forever. God's plan was for men to dwell in all the face of the world. That was it. He didn't say how he was going to dwell and dwell over the whole face of the world. So though God gave every nation an inheritance of land where those particular groups, nations-wise, dwelt at for a time, it wasn't God's will for it to stay that way. Then he started giving people over in each other's hands. Slavery's going on. These people taking over. These people taking over. These people taking over. These people taking over. And as a result of all this exile and mixing up, all these people, they mix in together, and everything become a big melting pot. Now nations that were distinct, living in a distinct place, now are not distinct, not living in a distinct place. Everything's mixed up now. Everybody's mixed up, having kids with each other, and now the family trees go like this. Because it wasn't really about those things, as Christ taught. Your true family is those who fear the Lord and do his will, not who you naturally sin from. Just as when the Lord made the first man, Adam, and then made Eve, it said every other man came through the womb of a woman, so that all things came from God. Though God started off with all these nations being distinct, yet through God's prophecy, he mixed everybody up, scattered everybody throughout the world. So the focus don't be about what nation you came out of, who you are according to the flesh, how great your people is above somebody else. My black skin's better than your lighter skin. It ain't about that. Yeah, God made the nations. God made the nations. All the focus got to be on the Lord and his purpose for everyone, which is not to argue over skin color, not to go, only you been in slavery, because not only you been in slavery, you lying if you're saying that, and you're foolish. With all the resources out there, you could easily dismantle that lie. But instead, you decide to go with it. Why? Because you're trying to find pride in your flesh. I'm better than everybody else. I'm an Israelite. When Moses, who was an Israelite, told the Israelites, you ain't better than nobody else. Y'all the same. Only if you obey God are you set above. Not because you're some Israelite. The prophet said the same thing to them. It doesn't matter if Abraham's your father. And Christ is plainly told them, if Abraham was your father, you love me. So he said Abraham wasn't really their father. Then the apostle told him the same thing. You ain't more special than anybody else. Not all of those who are born of Israel is of Israel. Not because you're the seed of Abraham are you really his kids. I told him that over and over again. You don't got no inherited specialness. Your hair ain't the best hair in the world. You know why? Black women and black men who walk around telling me we got the best hair in the universe because you got woolly hair or something, they ain't the best hair in the universe. Because all hair was made by God. What make your hair better than the white person's hair when God made you both? You want to argue about Adam. The first man was black, made from the dust of the ground. That's a stupid argument to keep making. Even if he was black, these white folks, or what we call white, they ain't really white, but these people that we call white, is their skin made of, do they got the same flesh as everybody else? They got the same kind of flesh as all humans that exist. Don't you know? Made of the dust of the ground. And, when they die, do they go back to the dust in which they came? Or only black people decay? Since, we made from the dust of the ground. What about their skin? Do their skin go back to the ground? If their skin go back to the ground and they die, what does that prove about themselves? That their skin, along with its pigmentation, come from the dust of the ground. And that's why the dust of the ground got many shades. So is it about your pigmentation? No, especially since these bodies are but seeds. It's about what's going to sprout out from these bodies. when we're planted in the ground. That's what it's really about. That's where the plant is. That's where the roots is. It ain't about what we see right now. It's about what we're going to see later on. And so the Lord allowed all these things to take place so we'll learn these things. And that we don't be no, who the people is today. Who the people is. You know who the people of God is today? The ones who fear the Lord and do his will, which is believe in the name of Jesus Christ and love their neighbors as themselves and love their enemies. And that's who the true people of God is. That's who the true Abraham seed is. That's who true Isaac is, and Jacob. Those are the ones who are going to be in the kingdom forever. But you got to understand prophecy. You got to understand revelation. No, man. That argument only works because you have a book of Revelation. But if you, and it don't work then, but still, you can only make that argument because you got a book of Revelation. You couldn't have made that argument when the gospel's first going out. You got to understand, the 12 gates doctrine it wouldn't have existed and worked during the time when the gospel was preached prior to John's revelation. Paul ain't walking around talking about those 12 gates, their names written on it. And you got to know who they are. And this kingdom's only for them. These foolish men only say that because they got these Bibles and they make these crazy interpretations. How your message can change, how the gospel message changes up over time. You go from a time frame where both Jew and Gentiles, whoever calls on the name of the Lord, can be saved. But then later on, John gives the update to the message and say, no. I received a message, man. It's only 12 gates, and only the sons of Jacob is on it. So that means we got to update. We got to kick all the Gentiles out, and because salvation is only for the Jews. What? You got to understand the reason for these things that took place. But you won't understand it. Listen to these guys and giving your ears over to foolish discussions about this over and over again, even among Christians. Instead of someone with understanding telling you the reason for these things and what God was teaching and what he wants you to know. Instead, they follow that rabbit hole trail through history and all this stuff, trying to trace slave trades, and they don't even trace all history. It's only arguing about a certain line of people. And if the argument's about curses and who've been through it, and everybody's all they keep talking is Israel, and these people saying we are Israel, and they keep trying to show that, like it's a never-ending trail because it doesn't matter who you choose. They'll all fit the curse descriptions. So anybody that makes the claim, we're the Israelites, and they keep going through their history and trying to show how that curse happened at this time, this curse happened at that time, it'll be a never-ending argument because everybody been through them. They all share the same kind of history. Why do you think there's British Israelism people who make the same claim? Because when they look at their history and what happened to the British people, this curse happened at that time. This curse happened at that time. This curse happened at that time. We the Israelites. If East Africans was to look at that and try to make a claim they're the Israelites, guess what? They look into their nation history and they'll find out, oh, our people was taken over here. We were sold on auction blocks there. We were taken in slave ships on here. We went in Egypt here since the whole freaking Barbary states and the Ottoman Empire and all that stuff was around in the regions. We experienced famine here. We experienced exile here. Our homes were taken over at this time. Everybody be able to find that because it happened to everybody. That's why it's pointless to argue that. So instead of arguing the pointless stuff, the question is, all right, fine. Everybody and their mama, if they search their history good enough, find some similarity to the evils that happened to the children of Israel in Deuteronomy. So what was the point of that then? If everybody can find this, what's the point? What did this God want you to know? What was the point? What's the teaching? What's the lesson? That's what matters. So that's why anytime I talk about Deuteronomy 28, guys, y'all never hear me sitting here arguing, trying to see who the Israelites is. Let's look at this curse, and these people fit it. So I tell you, it's a never-ending rabbit hole, because every person from every nation, just pick a nation. Just pick a random nation. Let's say today I identify as a Kyrgyzstanian. All right, fine. Now, go look up the Kyrgyzstanian people in their history. You know what you're going to find? That's the real people, Kyrgyzstanians, real people. They were taken over by the Muslims. You know what you're going to find in their history? You can find the same thing. The sons and daughters were taken away. They were sold as slaves, put on plantations, transported via chains, just like in here. Hold on. Let me see if I can find that image for y'all. Right here. Oops.
Fordelt over 300 år, der blev slaver i Nordafrika, er en overset og glemt historie.
These are white slaves in yokes of iron. Not only around their legs. Hold on.
Mange døde i fangenskabet som galejslaver eller byslaver. Kun få vendte hjem igen som Hak Olufs, og det er fra dem, vi har beretninger om fangenskabet.
Down around their legs. Hold on, I'm trying to find the other little clip here. There it is. But also around their necks. Even though Moses wasn't talking about literal iron yoke chains, but people that be making these arguments make an emphasis about yokes of iron around their necks. All right. These white slaves got chains not only on their legs, but around their necks. Yokes of iron. Because Moses didn't say to the Israelites, only you shall be bound by yokes of iron around your neck. That's not what he said. So if the blacks been through it, if the whites been through it, if the Kyrgyzstanians been through it, and they all got a similar history at different times when God decided to visit their people, what was God trying to say? What did he want each of these people to know? What was the purpose of the fall of the kingdom? And it was through humbling these nations, bringing them low, by removing their earthly inheritance. Through the gospel message, they will receive an heavenly inheritance that will last forever. That was the whole point. That's what the apostle said. God made from one man all the nations on the earth and determined when their kingdoms would rise and fall. What we were reading, what we were looking at, is the Lord causing nations that had their own inheritance, they were above, bringing them low and scattering them via ships, exiling from their earthly inheritance, going into slavery and chains. For what purpose? Why he brings them low like that? So that they would feel after him and perhaps find him, for he's not far from any one of us. So they can receive an eternal inheritance and not concern themselves no longer with a temporal earthly inheritance. So I hope you brothers and sisters understand that. This is why every once in a while I go back over this subject with the hopes that, somebody that's currently under that notion and doctrine, the Lord have mercy on and bring them out. Excuse me. If anybody has any questions, the email is at the bottom of TheChurchInTexas@gmail.com. TheChurchInTexas@gmail.com. But it's important that y'all understand that, man, that all the nations share the same history backdrop. Happened at different time frames in the world when the Lord decided to visit nations and bring them down low and send them into captivity and all that. But the reason for it, all right, the reason for it was a great reason. And the Lord used the children of Israel as a teaching lesson because they had the law. They had the clear revelation. The nations did not. But the nations that came in contact with the Israelites as the Lord was scattering them, they would come into hearing about God's rules. They would then hear about the Lord's anger and justice, and then they would then be sorrowful for their sins and then convert. That's the whole point. Convert to the Lord. And it was about Christ, because the law never saved anybody. I ain't never seen no Jew. Nobody would inherit life through that, as we talked about the other day. So why did God have converts under the First Testament if the First Testament never led to eternal life? It was only so that through that clear revelation, they would learn more of the God that created them. They would understand their sins and his holiness. And then, as toiling under the law of Moses and the heavy burden in which it was, then it will make room for the gospel message concerning Christ, as they wondered, then how can I be truly purified? That was the whole purpose of that. So remember that, brothers and sisters. Lord's will. See you guys Sunday at 12 p.m. 12 p.m. Central Time, or noon, 1 p.m. Eastern Time. Sunday, Lord's will, as we continue to learn more about our Lord and grow in his ways. But be warned, don't fall up the rabbit trail, guys. All right. There's a great purpose in God determining the rise and fall of the nations. All right. And his focus wasn't about who the Israelites is today. That wasn't his purpose and point. Plus, they were never lost in the first place. Dun, dun, dun. All right. Lost meaning nobody know who they were. They were lost in terms of like departed from their God. But as far as like people not know who they were, kind of lost, that you need to find them in this great secret quest trying to wake them up. No. So anyway, Lord's will, till next time. Peace.